Hey guys, I'm Dov, and today I'm back with more Vampire Coast Early Access action. Yes, indeed, we're here today to talk about matchups in general. This is going to be one of the last videos I make before the patch goes live for you all to jump in with myself and the other content creators who have had early access, and I am super excited for you guys to jump in. The patch itself, hopefully you guys saw my patch notes video, or if not, at least read patch notes themselves. There's a ton to look at there. It's going to be an awesome time, and the meta, I think, could shift depending on a few things. Most matchups probably going to be more or less the same than they were before, but there are a handful of major changes that we're going to dive into once the patch goes live with some of the other factions that I want to have a look at. But in this early access period, understandably, since Creative Assembly is kind enough to give me access, I definitely want to show off the new stuff to you guys. So a lot of you have been commenting that the Vampire Coast is weak. Other people have been commenting that the Vampire Coast seems OP. I find it hilarious that there are both, but yeah, Vampire Coast definitely solidly in the middle. Similar to the Tomb Kings, I think they're going to have a lot of matchups which are favorable and a lot of matchups which are not necessarily great. I do think that they're going to be relatively well balanced overall, and are going to be sitting low high tier, if not high middle tier, in terms of the tier list. Again, this is super early days, so we'll have to wait and see. There could be some incredibly cheesy or other sorts of things that we haven't really shown off here that could propel them up potentially, but this is one matchup I wanted to take a look at because it's one that I have played twice. Norska versus the Vampire Coast. Now granted, Lore Master of Sotek is the one playing the Vampire Coast. He took Mammoths knowing fully well that this was probably not the best idea in the world against the Vampire Coast because these guys are big targets. Vampire Coast is a powerful shooting faction, so just keep that in mind. Lore Master of Sotek knew that this army was probably going to get gunned down. It was just a matter of time. So we wanted to see, how quickly we could gun down these mammoths. In terms of the rest of the army here, it's got some marauders, some spearmen, a couple of javelin hunters, Balefiend, Lord of Shadows, and Throg. Yeah, I've got Nocti Boy up on the Necrofex, another Necrofex, the zombie gun line with 5 zombie handgunners, of course, the black spot on the extreme flank, and 5 zombie polearms. Relatively simple, straightforward build. We also have 3 deck droppers up in the air, so we're going max Daka here. You can see the deck droppers already opening up shots and pulling back as the javelins respond there. The bats are going to go in and tie those down so that the deck droppers can continue to fire away at the mammoth here. You can see Nocti Boy whiffing a shot clean there, but nonetheless, zombie gun line is going to be focused on the big mammoths, obviously. You can see them opening up shots, and because the mammoth is such a big target, this entire zombie gun line is going to be able to make contact with the majority of their shots, which is going to be pretty devastating considering the volume of fire they have. You can see the mammoths getting into the front line there, zombies with halberds gamely taking the charge. But yeah, just the volume of fire here, like I said, is going to be devastating. That mammoth already pretty much almost down. The other one on the other side already pretty much down as well. Charging into the black spot, which, I mean, granted, these guys don't have the best combat stats, but anti-large AP with high model count, they could potentially bayonet the ankles of this War Shrine Mammoth a little bit here. And with that, the balance of power has already shifted. You can see both mammoths just getting gunned down so fast that Norska really can't do much. The zombies in the front line holding long enough that we're able to take out those mammoths extremely quickly. You can see the marauders got beat down by those fellbats, and the deck droppers and everyone else now turning their attention to Throg. So Throg's now going to face the full wrath. You can see both Nocti Boy and the other Necrofex also opening up on him, which does knock him down, unfortunately, which means he's just going to continue to take that fire. Throg also doesn't have the best leadership in the world, and I mean, even if these were just the pistols, it would still potentially be a problem. He comes in, starts to lay a beating on Noctilus, but just the overwhelming missile fire is way too much. Lore Master Sotek pops that Wintertooth Crown to make him unbreakable, but that's just going to serve to letting him get gunned down even more. And with Throg off the field, it's only a matter of time before the Norskins give up their leadership here. So yeah, nice side shot there. Throg actually just gets straight up finished off by the zombie Daka squad. And yeah, with that, we're going to turn our attention to Balefiend, but at this point, it's pretty much critical army losses, and yeah, it's going to be an extremely quick victory for the Vampire Coast here. So, yeah. Well played, Lore Master Sotek. Hope you guys enjoyed watching that one. Just, 3 minutes maybe on that battle. I didn't 100% catch the timer there at the end, but 134 kills on that Balefine Lord of Shadows. Definitely like the wind spells on the front line. I think Lore Master Sotek maybe needed to use it a little bit sooner, but obviously, like I said in the beginning, we knew that this build probably wasn't going to work with the Mammoths. It was just, how quickly could I gun them down? And then with this particular build, it was extremely quickly. And, there are potentially some things Norska could do to combat this matchup, but I do think it's going to be potentially one of the tougher matchups for them. Let's go ahead and just get into it, I guess, and talk about some of the matchups and how I feel they're going to go. So, up against the Vampire Coast, High Elves, I think, are going to have one of the most favorable matchups because of their really excellent long-range, accurate archers. These guys do some excellent damage. They also have a pretty cost-effective counter-artillery piece in the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower. Lots of really cost-effective mobility as well. Well, I say cost-effective. They don't have any super cheap mobility, but, a couple of Reavers could definitely help to hold up the back line against Hounds and things like that. Yeah, High Elves definitely going to be in a good position in this matchup. Lizardmen, this one's interesting. Lizardmen infantry, if you just go with like a mass shielded infantry, I think that could potentially be tough for the Vampire Coast to deal with. We'll have to wait and see kind of how the meta shakes out, but if you were to take something like Saurus Old Blood on foot, with the new Cold-Blooded changes, I would definitely want to try and fill all 3 character slots if I could, so maybe a Skink Chief on a Pterodon. Wouldn't be a bad idea to go take pot shots at some light armor, high-value target, if there are any, or at the very least just shoot something. And then we need a caster, of course, so we're going to get Heaven's Skink and take him on the ground. Because flying units are definitely a risk in this matchup, I'll keep that Roiling Skies. We'll take Harmonic Convergence, maybe Wind Blast, and Curse the Midnight Wind. This Cube of Darkness, also a great little item to always take. Would definitely recommend that. And then something like, just tons of shielded infantry. Grab a ton of Saurus, maybe some Temple Guard, a whole bunch of Skink Cohort with the Precursor Javs. Something like this I think would honestly be pretty solid. I'd have to test it out for myself, but maybe you throw a Rev Crystal in there, although this thing is a little bit of a big target. Croc scores, they have only 15% missile resistance. For some reason I was thinking it was a bit higher, but anyway, Lizardmen could potentially be decent here. Dark Elves, I actually haven't played this matchup at all, but just from what it seems like, the Dark Elves could potentially have a good matchup here. They have a lot of units with Silver Shields, and even their low-tier units like Bleak Swords and Dread Spears would do pretty well against the zombies. Depth Guard could potentially kind of counter that, but it's going to be an interesting matchup, certainly. I do think the Dark Elves have a pretty good chance there. It's more even, I would say, than one-sided. Skaven, this one's definitely a bit one-sided. Skaven tend to struggle against the Death factions because of their low leadership overall. Vampire Coast mirror matchup, I actually have not played at all. I can't really speak to this too much, but I'd imagine it's going to be quite the shooting match because both sides are going to be extremely slow. Tomb Kings is another interesting one. The Tomb Kings, Tomb Guard are actually a really cost-effective unit in this matchup. The Tomb Kings sort of lack of AP with a lot of their infantry. Doesn't matter too much. Obviously you have the Tomb Guard with halberds, but Tomb Guard themselves don't have the best AP values. Not really the biggest issue here. You can definitely go mass infantry and get even some pretty cost-effective mobile units. I think the Tomb Kings honestly have a pretty good matchup against the Vampire Coast. We'll have to wait and see. Empire is another one that's going to be pretty even. It really just depends on what both factions bring. Dwarves, I think, it's interesting. This is another one that I think could go either way. The Mournghouls are a huge danger to the Dwarves, but at the same time, the Dwarves have a lot of really good counters at the Vampire Coast, and because the coast isn't fast enough to really get into contact, one of your best options could potentially be to outshoot, but then the Dwarves have tons and tons of super cost-effective, really powerful shielded infantry. Some of the best sword and board, axe and board in this case, infantry in the game. So I think they could potentially give the Vampire Coast some trouble. This could be one of the tougher matchups, I think, going forward. Greenskins, like like with the Skaven, tend to struggle against death factions because of their low leadership, so I definitely give this one initially to the Vampire Coast, although I do think that the Greenskins could come up with some tricky counterplay. We'll have to dive into that at a later date. Vampire Counts, this is a super interesting one. Luther Harkon is just an absolute menace in this matchup because the Vampire Counts very much, like the Coast to a degree, rely on their magic, and especially their lords, which are all, magic users, and with Luther Harkon being so good against them, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting matchup. I do think that the Vampire Counts can bring some good answers to the table, certainly, but we'll have to wait and see on that. Norska, as I showed in this particular battle, could potentially be in for a rough time against the Vampire Coast. I do think that there's a little bit of a paradigm shift perhaps that needs to occur here. Just, based on my experiences, I might take something like Wulfric, either on the horse or even on foot. He gets a better missile block chance, but just taking tons and tons of shielded infantry, or at least as much as you can within most tournament rule sets. We would take probably something like this. 5 Marauders with shields, some champions, and then, maybe just a whole bunch of hounds to compromise the backline. Norscan Ice Wolves have really good weapon strength, but their leadership and their melee defense is pretty poor. Miststalkers might not be a bad idea, just because they have stock, although I did notice that Famir seem to have lost their missile resistance in many cases. Oh no, these guys still have it. I forgot, it's just in this ability here. So maybe the Miststalkers, if you can get them into the right position, but again, those elite kind of high value targets are going to be potentially magnets for Norscan fire, so maybe you go with something else. Maybe you actually do bring some Berserkers, just because they'll cut through the zombies pretty quickly. That being said, you'll have to keep them safe behind your shield line, so just be aware of that. And then, hounds, just to compromise the back line, maybe you bring some cheap Ice Wolves, something like this. We're definitely lacking a caster, so I might definitely cut down some things and try and bring either a Fire or Shadows Balefiend. Fire might be better because of the leadership effects you get, especially from the Burning Head. Other spells, probably going to want some magic damage because you don't have any Famir in case they decide to bring ethereal units, which would be pretty crazy, but I've seen crazier things. Flaming Sword of Ruin. Cascading Fire Cloak can also be a really cost-effective kind of buff spell for just about any engagement, particularly if you're fighting something important. Toss that on Wulfric, for example, if he's hunting some champions. But yeah, I definitely think that this could be tough for Norska. Bretonnia, I also think that this could potentially be tough. Vampire Coast has some really good options to counter heavy cavalry, and Bretonnia, of course, relies very much on their heavy cavalry. That being said, they do have, again, the mass infantry options, especially with the mass peasants. Give them some chevrons, support them with the appropriate leadership units, maybe even take a paladin or two on foot to help support leadership, but I do think that there's some options there. Needs to be explored a little bit. Wood Elves, it's an interesting one. The Wood Elves, I think you're going to see a lot of extremely heavy missile builds, and you just run away and keep shooting, which is going to be terrible for the Vampire Coast. But just based on my experience, obviously the tree builds won't really work here, and a melee rush, you don't really have that many shielded units with the Wood Elves, so really the best option is just to try and outshoot the Vampire Coast. It could turn into some really interesting matchups. And then Beastmen, similar to Greenskins and Skaven, they struggle against death factions, so they'll probably not have the best matchup in the world here, although they definitely have some decent options for Vanguard, as do the Greenskins, which I think could be one of the Vampire Coast's sort of weaknesses. If you can go super heavy on the Vanguard, start in their face, immediately rush in before they have the chance to shoot you too much. But the leadership issues are definitely real. Warriors of Chaos, I think, have one of the better matchups because they have, again, super cost-effective shielded infantry, much better selection than Norska. You can take Chaos Warriors, Chosen with shields. You've got the Mirror Guard, one of the better regiments of renown in the game right now, in my opinion. You could even take some Forsaken. You've got Big Bird with his massive missile resistance, of course, just an absolute menace in this matchup. And of course, he gives you your caster and lord in one. So I definitely think that Chaos has a pretty solid matchup here. But yeah, overall, it's, Vampire Coast have maybe one with the Dwarves, maybe two matchups. Maybe the High Elves would be unfavorable. Tomb Kings, so three, maybe max four matchups that are unfavorable. The rest are either even or favorable, so I definitely think they're a well-balanced faction overall. We'll have to wait and kind of see how the meta shakes out over the next few weeks once the patch goes live. Sometimes can take even months and months for the meta to develop, and it does change over time even within a certain patch, so yeah. For those of you guys who are saying, oh, Vampire Coast is weak, or Vampire Coast is OP, or all of that, yeah, it's probably a bit too early to say, even from my perspective, who has been playing with them, for a week and a half now. So, yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed watching. If you do like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button, so that every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. If you found this interesting, informative, or entertaining, be sure to share it with your friends. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.